So, back in 2016, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, and I decided to go camping in eastern Pennsylvania. We picked this really primitive spot to camp for the night. It was free, had no cell service, and was barely accessible by road. Super secluded and just perfect. But we did run into a couple of other people. They might not factor into what happened later at all, but they were creepy, so I'll describe them. The first was a woman who had her truck off to the side of the road a little as we drove past while we were on our way to an adventure we decided to do. We were wanting to take a swim in a little lake. Anyways, the woman on the side of the road had the car hood open and seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer help. Usually, my boyfriend had no problem helping someone. He usually goes out of his way to help actually. However, in this situation, he said there was something off about her, and it didn't seem like a safe idea to stop. She didn't really seem like she needed help, and usually, people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach. She looked like she just expected we would stop. That's what my boyfriend said anyway. I hadn't really noticed anything that strange about her, but he did have an instinct on how people were, so I trusted him. The next person came when we had chosen a spot and were setting up a fire for hot dogs. I had noticed people drive by a few times, but my boyfriend pointed out that each time we saw someone drive past, it was the same car. Not only that, but the man in the car watched us each time he passed. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this, but we had driven around for a while before finding a place we liked. It had been raining and everything was muddy, and we wanted the driest site possible. He could have been doing the same thing. Who knows? We briefly thought about moving sites, but the road was muddy too. If he wanted to find us, all he had to do was follow the tracks anyways, so there was no point for us to move. There were some other tracks, but not many. He'd only have to backtrack a little to locate us again. He didn't come by another time, so we stayed and spent the remaining time before dark. No one else drove by. Once it got dark and we got tired, we go in our tent, ready to start the next day of adventure. We had gone to sleep, and sometime around 3 a.m., we were awoken by this very loud noise. I can't describe it very well, or even remember exactly what it sounded like, but my boyfriend said it reminded him of a chainsaw revving up. It was also similar to how it would sound if someone recorded a shovel being dragged over gravel and played it over a loudspeaker. He jumped up and looked out the little window mesh, but couldn't really see anything as it was pitch black, and the only light was the low burning embers that were still in the fire pit. The sound repeated itself another few times. I was too scared to speak, so my boyfriend whispered that it was probably miles off and I should go back to sleep. I didn't question this, as I figured loud sounds could be easily heard miles off. After we left, he told me it sounded like it had actually been coming from just down the road, but he didn't want to freak me out. Looking back, I probably should have wondered why he would bother to whisper if apparently the sound was far off. I was still terrified. Every little thing I heard outside sounded like someone was walking around the tent. We laid there for a while longer, when finally my boyfriend told me to get dressed because we were leaving. I was very alarmed by this, and even more alarmed when he unwrapped the machete we had bought just for this trip from its plastic before opening the tent. We quickly packed up and loaded the car. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, but despite the moon providing a little light, I couldn't really see. I did point out something my boyfriend hadn't noticed, though, before we got into the car. There was a beer can by our dead fire that hadn't been there before. We didn't even bring beer. While we were driving away, my boyfriend explained that he was nervous someone might have been trying to lure us out, so he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away. He also half expected to find our gas tank had been siphoned out, but that wouldn't have stopped us because we had a hybrid car. We joked that that would make a funny horror-type hybrid commercial. We only joked because if we didn't, we would have been even more terrified. We had to stave off our fear with humor. The rest of our trip, we only stayed in well-populated campsites or got a hotel.